not just let you walk away, just let you leave without a trace. When I stand here taking every breath with you, you're the only one who really knew me at all. Wow. You know, when I started with GE Capital at the office in Bloomington, I was really hopeful of having a career. And so being laid off was, kind of a blow, because I kept going short job to short job and, wondering if I was missing a step here somewhere. And so I actually was off, and at home when I got a call from John, the guy who was the hiring manager, the senior vice president, the divisional, and John said, "Hey Bob, listen, we're going to bring you in for an interview any day now. We just don't know when. We're just looking for approval. And so, have your presentation you're supposed to do for us ready, and we'll let you know." And so, as I had mentioned earlier, I spent the summer doing a little bit of sailing on my little puffer sailboat that we still had. And in fact, I believe it was a Wednesday, we had been out sailing on the St. Croix here in Hudson, and I got severely burned on my back, severely burned. And then I got a call from John that evening, that late afternoon, and he said, "Hey Bob, can you be in here Friday morning for the presentation? We're going to fly you out tomorrow at like 3 or 4. And that would get me in very late. And of course I said, "Hey, absolutely, 3rd-degree burns and all." They didn't tell him about those, but of course, you think to yourself, wow, what a treat to have for that. And so I got on the plane and I flew first to Pittsburgh. And we got to Pittsburgh about 10 o'clock. I was supposed to get into Richmond at about 11:15, check into the hotel, and then the next morning I was going to meet my manager for the interview at 8:30. And at about 10:15, the crew timed out. And they gave me 2 choices. One, we could take a 5-hour cab ride that they would pay for, or whatever it was, to get to Richmond. Or I could get a hotel, they would provide and pay for the hotel, and then the next morning I would get the earliest flight, which would get me in at 7 o'clock, and go do my interview. So by the time I got to the hotel, it was 1 o'clock in the morning. I didn't have a cell phone to call anybody from GE and tell them that I was not going to make the hotel reservation, nor could I call the hotel, because I didn't have a cell phone. I mean, this is 2001. I had one for work, but once I lost my job, it was just kind of an extra expense, and we had another one. But I woke up the next morning with about 4 hours of sleep, if less, because of my severe burns. So I'm exhausted. I bought a brand new suit, brand new tie. I'd done just as John asked, dark blue suit, bright colorful tie, I believe it was yellow, brand new shoes. And as I'm getting out of the car at the campus, I scuffed my shoe. And I was just certain that I had just made the most mortal mistake in wholesaling, and that is, don't have a scuff on your shoe. So I go into the hotel, and there was an elderly African-American gentleman who was the shoe shine and did an absolutely just incredible job, and it made me wonder how long he had crafted that, because when he was done, it was barely noticeable at the least. I went into the interviews, and generally speaking, was a good interview. What had happened was that one of the large segments of long-term care insurance was known as the broker-dealer channel. And we had an entree to that with smaller firms around the U.S. that I mentioned came through our office. And this was the big expansion. The wirehouses wanted not an insurance agent, they wanted an actual wholesaler. They didn't want a schleppy, not that insurance agents are, but there's a persona. They wanted a professional, trained wholesaler who understands how to work in a wirehouse. And the wirehouses are those firms who had offices around America, and they had a direct wire from their office into the stock exchange so that they could trade. And that's why they were known as wirehouses. And so, I went and did my presentation and was doing my thing on long-term care. And the reason that I was the one doing it and not one of our previous career agents was because the career agent side had said to these guys, "You can't touch any of our agents. You can't touch any of our staff. You can't touch anybody there. So they'd been hiring people from outside the company. They hired a guy from a top salesperson from, I think, Manulife and from a number of other companies. And so, what they had to do was they had to find people who understood the product and then hope that they had wholesaling skills or hope that they were wholesalers and knew the product. And having come from the sales office, not only did I know the product, but I'd been telling the story for a long time. And since I was laid off, I was free game. They could hire me right away. And so after the interview, I was walking out with John, the manager, and he said, "Bob, I think you did really good today, and I only look for one candidate at a time. And I want you to know that I'm going to do my best. I'm going to try and get you $56,000 and a bonus and an expense account. And hopefully I'll be giving you a call in the next day or two." So I went from 32 in the office, I just got laid off, and this gentleman wants to basically double my salary and bonus as a job and an opportunity. And suddenly I realized that, financial services had a lot of money in it. I became consciously incompetent of something brand new to me, which was how insurance agencies work and how insurance companies work. There were two parts about the interview that I thought were really interesting. And the first one came from the very highest manager, the divisional manager, a guy by the name Marty. And, in the middle of my presentation, Marty, like a broker, says, "Hey, what's my commission?" And I stopped, and I answered the question, and I moved on. Now, the truth was, just shortly after 9/11, which was only a few weeks after this, you weren't supposed to talk about commissions. And I can talk about that in later videos, because I'm going to really start talking about where my conscious competence comes in understanding what happened in 2012. So one, he thought, "Hey Bob, that was great. You knew just on the fly to just answer my question. You understood that I needed to know something and you gave it to me." Yeah, that was pretty easy to do. And then the second interesting part of it was the true explanation, he says, of what I do for it. He says one of the interview questions, "So Bob, what do you think this job is? What do you think you do?" And of course I layered in as much as I could recall from the job description. I'm going to create relationships, and I'm going to do lunches, and I'm going to tell stories, and I'm going to, get in, and he says, "Look, here's the deal. As a wholesaler, your job is to get up and go tell the story. And then when you're done telling the story there, you're going to go to the next office, you can tell the story again. And when you're done telling that story to that office, you're going to go to one more office that afternoon, and you're going to tell the story to those guys." And I realized that this would be a fantastic job for me, because I think I actually have a little bit of talent in telling stories. And as I'll share over the next number of videos, where I'll intersperse work with life, because that's really the easiest way to do it, you'll see that I had a really fantastic mentor who taught me how to tell stories even better. And more importantly, I had an opportunity to market communicate freely, and I did. And it was a lot of experience that I'm very grateful for, because I created a workshop, a presentation that most people thought was highly entertaining. My sales were always within mid-range to upper. And so when John called me and I was gratefully accepting the job, I suddenly came to realize that, I have a lot of experience in long-term care. A lot. And it's kind of odd how these are crisscrossing. And so I went from being in the sales office doing, some sales training and mostly paperwork training, to being the guy who sits across the table and helps to sell the broker's long-term care insurance portfolio to their clients through workshops and individual meetings. And I learned one really unique thing about this. I was trying to explain the product to people and trying to make it make sense. And I asked myself one day, I said, I've never really asked my car insurance agent to explain my auto insurance to me. And so I called him up and I said, "Hey, will you explain auto insurance to me?" And I'll be honest with you, I was surprised at how poorly he was able to effectuate the features and benefits of the policy. He did not have a walkthrough for an insurance policy and what it provides. And I set my mind to that. And so out there, if you ever have long-term care insurance and had an appointment with me, you have a giant diagram that I created to lay out, which is a story about how long-term care works and long-term care insurance works. And I then layered that into my workshops. And in the first 2 years, I had a fantastic experience working not only first with John, but after about a couple of months, I got a new manager named Stan. And Stan was my manager until I was laid off in 2012. And he's probably the greatest person I've ever worked for in my life. He was patient with me. He knew how to get the best out of me. And I think he honestly cared about my outcome. And that was one of the things that I really enjoyed about working with Stan. The last thing I'm going to talk about is an experience that happened as I was at a training. Because the training was about making us better wholesalers. And it was held on a weekend. And the managers were in there with us, and we were in Richmond, Virginia, which was where Marty was. Marty was off playing baseball with his kid. Not that we had anything on our weekend plans, but we were all there dutifully working. And I recall one very specific thing that he said. He had to make the point that paying commissions was actually a good thing. That paying commissions meant that there was business flowing, and that is very true. The thing is, at the time, GE had put the commission payments on the positive ledger as if they were making income off of the commissions, when in fact they should have been on the expense side because it was an outflow. And in long-term care insurance, you have to reserve a certain portion of that money every single year. And the very first year, actually the first couple of years of a long-term care insurance policy, between commissions and processing costs, they have to borrow the money to reserve and then pay it back to whoever's loaning them that money. They can't, the entire first year premium's just gone. And in fact, at the end of the 2 years, I looked back at the financial model for what we were doing, and I realized we had to have been spending at least the first 3 years worth of premiums, at least for all of my business, and I was doing $40,000 and $50,000 a month in long-term care insurance. And how a company would operate on that was a mystery. And then a few years ago, it turned out there had been a class action lawsuit by investors who looked at that practice and said, no, this was backwards, and you were deceiving us. It's just really interesting to have been at sort of those pinnacle peak turning points where they played with the numbers in order to make the math on it work. Because I would become consciously competent of that occurring in multiple situations in my life. And they would culminate in a sudden collapse. And that's a story we'll get to over the next 7 or 10 years. I'm going to talk more about my wholesaling, but I just wanted to share that piece of the story of how I began with it and some parts of it. And I'll layer the rest in as we go. I want to thank you today and this week for your time, and I hope you have a great week. Peace.